everybody. Welcome to Shadow at Night. This is Tuesday, October 29th. It's deadline day for Justin Trudeau, as far as the Bloc Québécois is concerned anyway. Will they or won't they try to pull the trigger on a non-confidence vote? No, I don't think they will. They can't, actually, because Parliament is paralyzed right now because the Liberals won't give these documents that the rest of Parliament wants to the RCMP regarding the $400 million green slush fund. So no government business can proceed in the House of Commons at present. However, that could change in the next couple of days. And the Bloc have said, well, at least the leader of the Bloc have said, we'll take the first opportunity. We're talking with the leaders of other parties right now. We'll take the first opportunity to bring down the government, as long as the non-confidence motion doesn't have something to do with the fact that there's going to be pipelines or they're going to remove the carbon tax, because we believe in that stuff. So there's a lot of complicated negotiations going on behind closed doors. We have a former Liberal MP, an 18-year Liberal MP on the show tonight. His name is Dan McTeague. He's also the president of Canadians for Affordable Energy, and you probably remember him best as a senior analyst for Gas Buddy. Dan McTeague joins the show in just a couple of minutes. As a matter of fact, here's a video of Dan talking about the green scam, at least as far as I call it, and all of the grifters along the way. This is from a podcast called The Victoria Rumble Room a few months ago. Check it out.
Receive money so they can come up with trendy little studies, many of them not peer-reviewed, many of them where there's never been a cost-benefit analysis. And thankfully, I think the next government's going to take those people, cut them off at the knees, and say, if you want to push those kind of studies out, you do it without having your nose directly connected to the public trough, because we're sick and tired of the fanaticism, not based on science, but based on whimsical thinking that you can somehow get rid of these things. I'm upset for one reason, because we're now seeing a Canadian economy in real decline. People can't afford to make ends meet. Energy prices have gone through the roof. I've been saying for 6 or 7 years now, if you continue down this road, then what you're going to wind up with is an economy which is going to be very difficult to turn around. And we find ourselves increasingly at that point where we may not be able as a country to pull back. I saw this stuff in the 1990s as a member of Parliament when we went deep into debt. We're probably in a worse situation now than we were then. And anybody who has any misgivings about this had better sharpen up, because if you're going to listen to a couple of, Pied Pipers who have their own environmental agenda, making sure they get tons of grift, call themselves charities, so there's no scrutiny as to the kind of charitable work that they do. There's a number of ways to skin this cat. I hate to use that expression, but I think these people need to be exposed for the frauds that they are and the deception that they're providing.
All right, there is Dan McTeague, once again, the president of Canadians for Affordable Energy. He joins the show in just a moment. The Shadow at Night live stream is brought to you, as always, by CanadaNanoSilver.com, the toothpaste that comes in multiple flavors: cinnamon, spearmint, bubbleberry for the kids. Who we kidding? Bubbleberry for everybody. Naturally whitening, helps keep your teeth clean with triple action nano silver. Silverceuticals made from only the highest quality ingredients. This unique toothpaste is kid safe and uses powerful natural ingredients. Triple action nano silver helps clean your teeth, promotes healthy teeth and gums. And then above ground mined coral calcium helps to scrub and remineralize your teeth. And of course, it all contains the power of Silverceutical technology. The toothpaste, again, in cinnamon, spearmint, and bubbleberry for the kids. They're going to want to brush their teeth at least 6 times a day. CanadaNanoSilver.com. Again, that is CanadaNanoSilver.com. If you're looking for a retail location near you, you can find one online on the website and the retail locations tab. There are over 30 to pick from all across the country. And if you want to be a retailer of these awesome products, get a hold of Kevin and Anna through the contact tab at CanadaNanoSilver.com. Again, that is CanadaNanoSilver.com. Hello, Dan. There was a lot to unpack with the bomb that you dropped on the Rumble Room Victoria podcast a few months ago. I want to start with the grifters. And by the way, welcome to the show. Thanks for coming on tonight.
Shadow, it's great to be here. It's been a long, long time, but glad to meet up with you here, and let's let her have some fun tonight.
Yeah, let's do that. Well, the last time we talked, I was hosting a corporate radio morning show for Chorus Entertainment. You were with Gas Buddy, the you were the senior analyst. What happened with Gas Buddy? Can you talk about that publicly, or is that something you want to keep to yourself?
No. We parted ways. I was more interested in what was happening in Canada rather than bingo calling gas prices in the United States, which is primarily what my job was. But I was deeply concerned, and as I had been since about 2015, 2016, the direction the country was taking, not just politically, but also economically, and the impacts it was having on energy prices. And of course, my many moody predictions that said that Canadians would wind up paying a significant toll, much more than what they can expect and much more than what they could afford to pay for, considering the federal government's attack on our energy sector, blocking pipelines, emissions, carbon taxes, and of course, all that added in, weak Canadian dollar, which takes 139 pennies to buy a US dollar today or more. This has happened before 4 years ago and happened several years ago, but adding in no small way to the inflationary hit that many Canadians are struggling with right now. And of course, we're just seeing maybe the first or second inning of this show, and it's not looking very good for the Canadian economy, no matter what they do now. A lot of what we're experiencing today, a government that is engaged in reckless spending, a government that has been printing money, a government that has attacked the very golden goose that supports our social programs and our finances of this country. All these things have been traded aside. And that's primarily why I left my work at Gas Buddy after 5 years. And for the past 6 years, I've been here at a little organization called Canadians for Affordable Energy. And our point is simply about ensuring that we have policies that reflect what I think many Canadians take for granted. And that's not just the availability of energy, but also that it comes at a price which most of us can afford and for which all of us have benefited from, whether we like it or not, over the past 20, 30, 40 years.
Canadians for Affordable Energy, is that a lobby group? Is it a think tank? What do you guys do exactly?
It's Dan McTeague doing a lot of work and putting together, almost 20 years in the House of Commons and working as a policy advisor for several Liberal ministers and members of Parliament. My own time, 18 years as a member of Parliament, as well as my experience in the private sector, both with companies like Toyota Canada, Royal Bank, and of course, my work on energy, which I think has been well known for the past 30 years. The bottom line is to try to find ways to help people manage their budgets and ensure that energy pricing, rather than being a drag, in fact, becomes a solution to our standard of living, our way of life. I think I've proven that, though, Shadow. And I talked about this, about predicting gas prices. It just didn't happen out of thin air. It goes back to my time in 1998, 1997, when I was deeply concerned about retail gas companies going out of business because they were being squeezed by their supplier and in many respects competitor. And that created a situation where we saw a lot of gas stations exit the market. Prices started to go up. And of course, consumers were stuck with what was called lockstep pricing. I got around lockstep pricing by figuring out how they priced and then made that publicly available every day or two before that actually happens. And most people, again, they can take it for granted. Wonderful. When I'm dead and gone, they'll have an opportunity to continue that. But it has saved over the years tens of thousands of dollars for many people in the time in which I've been doing this, going back to 1997. So that's what 27, 28 years since I invented that, and glad to see others are joining in. Some people may not think it's a big deal, but give an example, Shadow. Tomorrow, in many parts of Canada, gas prices will plummet 3-4 cents a liter. Welcome news. The fact that people have that in advance allows them to, on their 50 or 60 liter fill up, save $3 or $4. If you can do that once a week, times 50 weeks, 52 weeks a year, that's $150 over the past 30 years. Go figure.
Yeah, that would add up to a lot of money over that period of time. You were a Liberal MP, Dan, from 93 to 2011, I think it was, under Jean Chretien first and then Paul Martin. Let me ask you, because here we are in 2024, we have a completely different Liberal Party, at least so it seems, from the party that you were a member of and a member of Parliament for. How exactly has it changed? How has it morphed?
Well, members of Parliament in my time worked in the party, distinguished themselves publicly, and were called upon to ask if they wanted to consider a role in the party and, of course, in public life. And we had leaders like Jean Chretien, and we had people like Paul Martin. We had leaders after and before who were very deferential to public opinion and to the difference of opinion. So bottom line is each one of these people were were people who had been really knit from various backgrounds and had really distinguished themselves and had become names in their communities or in their faculty or the area in which they define themselves. So the Prime Minister would basically choose the best team, but those members of Parliament really could, walk and chew gum and stand on their own and really had a brain before they went in. They weren't there to sign an oath of fealty to the leader or have the leader go and say you agree certain conditions in order to be a candidate. That's what makes it different in terms of the quality and caliber of candidates that we had. The second is that we were a party that was not ideologically underpinned. We were not, held back to a certain regime and certain narrative. And I'm not talking just about what Trudeau's obsession is, euthanasia and abortion. No, we were not told at the time, that you were supposed to be socially responsible and provide opportunities for people to make better lives of themselves. And that's really the pursuit many of us had. Now it's just socialist. And I'm not afraid of saying that. This is a socialist, left-wing, far left-wing party. It's not even a liberal party. It has no bearing to the Liberal Party I knew as a child and as a young man growing up. Remember, I joined the Liberal Party in 1974, working in Hugh Faulkner's riding in Peterborough, stuffing envelopes back at that time and, trying to help put signs together. I then worked for Paul Cosgrove in 78, 79, and 1980, Derek Lee, Alvin Curling, there's the names go on before I finally ran in my own right in 1992 and became candidate for what was then called Ontario riding, which is Pickering, Ajax, and Whitby. Of course, that meant many, many years working in the trenches and understanding what the real Liberal Party was. And so I can go back and pull out books like this from Jack Pickersgill, a fellow from Newfoundland, who at the time was Undersecretary to Prime Minister Lester B. Pearson. And even Pearson himself, although we talk about Pearson, a lot of us don't really know about him, but he wrote many points about what liberalism was. And he made a point of trying to distinguish. And here's an example. In other words, liberalism accepts social security, but rejects socialism. He goes on and says, it accepts free enterprise, but rejects economic anarchy. And it accepts humanitarianism, but rejects paternalism. Those are just small examples of the kind of Liberal Party I knew. It was that had this sort of principle, this sort of consensus building, bring people together. That's been completely obliterated on Justin Trudeau because the guy had no idea what the party was that he overtook. In fact, it's very distinct from what his father used to espouse. One of the most critical things, his father could stand up to opposition. Within his own ranks, he said, you got an issue you want to take up with me, that's fine. You talk about it in caucus. I'll let you have a free vote. You can do whatever you want. Chretien did the same thing. If you're strong enough and you're willed enough to stand on these, Justin can't handle any opposition from within his own ranks, which makes this whole affair of the past week kind of interesting, but really a sideshow, given that this is a man who chose his candidates based on their fealty to him and to him alone.
This is interesting because you lived through the tumult of 2001, 2002, the sponsorship scandal, Paul Martin, the mutineers taking over the ship that Jean Chrétien was steering the captain of for 9 or 10 years. Is that a lot the same as what's going on today, or was that a lot the same, or was it a completely different ballgame back then?
It was different that time. The members of Parliament were not afraid to express themselves. I happened to be one of those mutineers, and I had great respect for Mr. Chrétien, but I also felt it was time for change, and I wasn't afraid to say it. Nor was I cowering from the media. If someone does a Google search and says, let's go see what Dan McTeague was doing in Chicoutimi or Chicoutimi rather, in the summer of 2002, they'll see that I very much was very outspoken on a number of projects, a number of ideas. But I think Jean Chrétien himself, and even Eddie Goldenberg, his secretary, his principal secretary, and the one before that, Percy Down, who's now a senator, admitted at the time, they said, 9 years, your time's up. You've done a good job. Move on. You have 3 majority governments, Mr. Chrétien. It's time to give the field to someone else. Let them mess it up, and they did. But the fact is that we are looking at a very different time in which members of Parliament haven't got the backbone, and those that do are already exiting. They're not going to run next time, so it doesn't matter if they sit as independents or they sit within the caucus. What is left of it until the election?
You got out in 2011. Was that because you lost the election, or you just decided not to run again? I wasn't able to.
No, I won by 10, 11,000 votes in 2008, lost by 6, 7, 800 votes in 2011, and it was a godsend for me. Best thing that ever happened. I was able to finally get out, and really happy that I did. My fellow next to me, who I shared my old boundaries with, John McKay, and I, when I went to Ottawa in 1981, 82, my work was called writing analysis, and that's what they hired me for, to work in Paul Cosgrove's office. And I knew full well that if I'd stayed or gone over to Scarborough-Guildwood, and John McKay had done what he wanted to do, which is go Scarborough East and keep that part of the riding at Pickering, it would have been a different outcome. I said, John, we'll have a tough election someday. I'm on the Pickering side. I will lose and you will win. And by the way, it wasn't the Conservative vote that did me in my riding. It's all those wonderful Liberals who just love to vote NDP. So there's a little bit of irony for you.
Vote splitting was a thing even back then. Did you see Justin Trudeau coming even back then? I mean, I think he was a backbench member around then, because I can tell you, Dan, that when I heard that Justin Trudeau was going to run as a Liberal, I went, oh no. It's only a matter of time before he takes over that party. Did you see that coming?
Yeah, well, I saw it coming because he wrote me a wonderful letter that I like to give to my Liberal colleagues out there who, when I attack them and go after them, don't like me to reveal this letter. But it basically says a lot of things about it, because the great work I did, looks forward to seeing me again May 11th. So I knew he was definitely coming back, or he was going to try to run as leader. You could see that in the early days, but definitely by 2011, he was when the loss of the party was so complete. I mean, we were reduced to 32 seats. I think I was ranked number 33 in terms of my my numbers. But anybody who got ahead of me actually won by 100 votes or more. Anyone who was behind me obviously lost. But no, I got the impression right from the get-go that when he was out doing all his speaking and tours, the Liberal Party was desperate. They've been decimated in 2011. So this was the great Messiah who was going to take them to the promised land, and he did. In fact, I mean, to his credit, the name Trudeau rang a bell, and many parents told their kids, "You get out there. This isn't just about voting for dope. We want you to get out and vote for Pierre Trudeau." And he did great things. He brought us to this country, and so there was that sense of getting it right in 2015, that people said, yeah, we give the Conservatives 3 terms, including the last majority, but now we have to go back to where we started. And that it was the solution. It was a short-term fix for the Liberal Party, because it didn't spend too much time out of opposition. In fact, it was third position, coming back to first. But the problem is it never redefined itself. It never defined itself in the eyes of people. And today it's just seen as a group of individuals pushing a woke agenda and spending a lot of money that the country simply doesn't have.
What is your take, Dan, on this woke mind syndrome, as Elon Musk calls it? I mean, I call it neo-Marxism. It's a new brand of Marxism. Old school thinking is control the means of production. That's what Marx wrote back in the day. And these days it's morphed into control the means of communication. Stop anybody from speaking who has a different point of view than you, whether it's through social media, whether it's through corporate media, whether it's through direct conversation. We're seeing this all over the place in city and town councils and school boards, even, where if you want to stand up and say, no, I don't believe that kids should be able to read books on gay sex at 8 years old, they call you a bigot, they call you a racist, you're anti-trans, and you get kicked out, and the police will accompany you on your way out the door. What is all of this about, and where do you think it came from?
A very dangerous narrative designed to get people to conform to what is really a deforming of society. It's an attack on everything of value, valuable, whether it's economic, whether it's social, whether it is the principles that have brought this country to the great place that it is. All of these things have now been not just subject to doubt, they've actually been repudiated. And with it has come a decline, a collapse that everybody feels. Save and except the woke that are out there who get the odd bit of grift here and there, and are given little taps on the head so they can go out and munch down a little bit of granola in their little hovels wherever they live. With taxpayers looking after them. The reality is that the country has fallen, and it isn't just an international thing. I mean, obviously, we know that our trading partners aren't very happy with us. We know that there's no trust in terms of our security. We have to look at the weaknesses in our institutions, where governments are saying, "Hey, listen, we have a problem with unemployment, so we're going to simply employ a bunch of civil servants." We have this idea that money grows on trees and that we can spend with abandon. That the country owes you this, and that somehow we've been very bad in the way in which our history has been treated. Nothing is of value. We've basically said, tear down the totem poles, to use a pure Elliott Trudeau, and we've done that with enormous lack of pushback from people who ought to know better. And now we've got a real mess in our hands. There's an old expression, I won't say what it is, but I do love it, FAFO, and I think most of your listeners will know exactly what that is. F around and find out. And that's what we've done. We've basically said, who cares? It's someone else's responsibility. Well, if you don't look after your country in the way our parents and our grandparents fought for it and developed it and sacrificed for it, then of course it's going to die. Unfortunately, that which goes with it is a whole generation of children and people who will never know the great experiment of this country. So now, of course, is rather than running the country off, we've gone down and seen this experiment. I think we're opening a new page in which people universally recognize the malignancy that has been allowed to metastasize. And it's time to basically replace what we have and get back to what really works. And I think that's going to happen over the next year. And a lot of people from a lot of political strands are going to come together on this. And I think that's already starting to happen.
Dan, when you were in government as a Liberal MP, were there certain things a government wouldn't do? Where the checks and balances, I think, in our government is what people are concerned about, and how this version of the Liberal Party has just rolled over them with their carbon taxing, with declaring the Emergencies Act and whatnot. As a matter of fact, Danielle Smith, the Premier of Alberta, said today that they're going to take the government, the federal government, to court over the carbon tax carve-out they gave to the Atlantic provinces. She thinks is unfair and unconstitutional and unlawful. Do these people even understand that many of the things they have done over the past few years are unconstitutional, or do they just not care?
Unconstitutional and Canadian, yes, they do understand that, but they're so willing and so into their own press releases and their own headlines and their own talking points that they don't give a damn for anything else. The country is a diverse nation. It is a nation which has survived on intricacies of people willing to, as I mentioned earlier, consensus, willing to put a little bit of water with their wine and try to work to cobble out something that's better for everybody in general. I mean, united we stand, divided we fall, and we're, the chain is only as strong as its weakest link. Whatever example you want to use, but there's now significant, serious pushback. And yes, Danielle Smith in Alberta, but I mean, even look at the whole net zero agenda. This whole thing I've done on affordability has everything to do with the fact that we are being pushed by an international movement to say that one particular molecule presides over everything, and that we should be concerned that if there's, one morning it's raining, next morning it's sunny, that's a sign of climate change, and that it is an emergency, it's a disaster. And to do that, we've piled on all regulations and all kinds of policies to make a few alarmists, fanatics, and catastrophists happy. I think it's time for most Canadians, I think many Canadians are starting to agree, the squeaky wheel no longer gets the oil. It gets replaced.
What about all the lying? I mean, we've always known as members of the public that politicians are going to fudge the truth sometimes, outright lie other times, but it never seemed to have been as consequential as it has been today as we become more and more polarized. I mean, Trudeau last week or the week before told the entire country at the Foreign Inquiry Commission that he has the names on that list of MPs or senators, parliamentarians who have been unwittingly or knowingly working for foreign powers. And he refuses to give them out. But he did say there was some conservatives on that list. But he knows we'll never, ever be able to prove him wrong, because we'll never see the names on that list, at least as far as he's concerned. I mean, how far are these people willing to go?
Well, as far as they are to cover up the litany of scandals and corruption that appears to be popping up everywhere. I mean, there isn't a day that goes by that something isn't happening. And it's, Trudeau may reflect on that with Harper, but I've never seen anything like this where, in my time, one Gomery inquiry would have done us in. Here you have a Gomery on Quaaludes, you got it on steroids. Basically, one major STDC, ArriveCAN app, money that's going out the window and not being vetted properly. I mean, there's all sorts of scandals and concerns, with ministers like Randy Boissonnault. There's concerns about, how housing affordability has been compromised and who's actually getting this money. There is so much to go after. I'm not sure the next government is going to be able to do it in 4 years to go after all of this. What I do know is that there is a greater likelihood now that given the acrimonious state of our parliament and the anger that Canadians have. I mean, I'm hearing now people saying to me, "Oh, Dan, don't push to get Trudeau out. We want him there. We want to have the luxury. We want to have the benefit. We want to have the pleasure of kicking him to the curb." And I hope he does stay there for that reason, if for that reason only. But the man has done a terrible job, and he's ruined pretty much everything he's touched. He has the Midas touch in reverse, as they say. Everything he touches is turned to garbage. And yet there's still 22% of Canadians out there. What are they, dope? They have nothing in their brains. Is the gray matter completely gone? It frustrates me, not that the Liberals are doing this, but that there's so many dolts out there who actually want to support these people again, whether it's Liberal or NDP, and dare I say even Green.
You bring up a good point, though. When we say the word liberal, as far as the Liberal Party is concerned, I think a lot of us go back to the old version of what that party was when you were an MP for them, like when it was supposed to be liberal. Like you guys would look at everything pragmatically, and then you would come up with a decision. You weren't, as you pointed out, ideologically driven. But today that is different. The lies. You were talking about the climate grift on that podcast back in Victoria a few months ago, and you've mentioned it a little bit tonight. When our Minister of Environment and Climate Change, Guilbeault, steps up and says, "There's a fire over there, climate change. There's a hurricane over there, climate change." They're all doing that these days. Do these people not have any pride, or do they just think that Canadians are that stupid? They never bring any proof either.
Well, they've got a generation of indoctrinated people, whether it's our institutions or schools, that are teaching them this kind of hysteria, which has no place. The science is not settled, as Stephen Koonin, a man who actually studies this stuff, would have said, as many other climate scientists have done, true climate scientists I'm talking about. By the way, Stephen Koonin, read his book, for those of us who haven't, wrote a few years ago. It's called Unsettled. Stephen Koonin was the environment secretary to President Obama. So we're not talking about a right wing fellow who happened to work for the Republicans. His point is simply that you haven't proven this. The science groups that are coming forward are usually well funded by governments to come out with only one particular conclusion. And I think that might have been okay 10 years ago. It's not okay now, because a lot of people are starting to say, wait a minute. We are getting variable temperatures. We've had variable temperatures for many years, and we're going to continue to have those. There is a dynamic in terms of our atmosphere that is extraordinarily difficult to discern. And, as I like to say, if weathermen cannot figure, who are jumping all over this stuff because they get grift from the federal government, I think of some of the media out there, some of the weather networks and other things like that receive money from the federal government. All they want to talk about ad nauseum is climate. But, if folks can't get tomorrow's, weather prediction correct, how the hell are they going to be able to get it in the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years, and usually spectacularly wrong as predicted?
How many different climate grift groups are out there that are being funded by the public? I mean, I'm sure that you've done some kind of a head count over the last couple of years since you've been president of the Canadians for Affordable Energy group. I mean, there's got to be, some people that come directly to mind.
Yeah, well, the big ones, the Canadian Federation of Municipalities receives a couple $1 billion every year. That started, by the way, by accident by Paul Martin way back when we gave them back money back in 2006, 2005. But here's the thing. I mean, they will receive money. Canadian Climate Institute would be another one. I love going after them because they got $52 million from the federal government. Every time the federal government comes out and says something about climate, guess who's out there with a press release right behind them? The fact is that no one knows who supports them. I support myself here. We have people who actually, we write out and say, hey, would you like to donate a bit of money? Plus, I worked in the private sector. I worked my buns off. I have an MP pension. And believe it or not, I know what I'm doing. So a lot of the studies that I'm doing involves reading a book and looking up the documents myself where I need to write my op-eds or whatever the case may be. But enough about me. I don't go around asking the federal government for billions of dollars. I'm sure not going to ask the oil companies for their money. They don't like me because I predict gas prices. They've been losing tens of millions of dollars on my predictions for years. Nevertheless, I'm not about who's right and who's wrong. The reality here is that no one should be giving money to organizations that call themselves charitable and in fact do no charity, and foundations that are created simply for the purposes of getting the government to give them money for which they have no other objective but to skew the debate, skew the argument, and to basically, polish the apple of the federal government when it comes to anything to do with climate. The reality is that it's now an important issue, but it's nowhere near the top 5. And for most Canadians now, you've sacrificed in pursuit of that particular goal, you've sacrificed affordability, and you've now hurt the unity within the country, within the Federation. No one had the right to do that. And the grifters should all know that in 1 year from now, their money is going, including the Canadian Federation of Municipalities, who has a tendency to show up every once in a while to say, wonderful things about what the federal government is doing and how we have to keep talking about climate emergencies and whatnot. By the way, and this is not to get too much of a point down the road, I think if there's a new government, happens to be Pierre Poilievre's Conservatives, he has 2 challenges. Yes, we know the Senate is stacked by Justin Trudeau, so it's going to be very hard to move legislation and change. But he's also got the Canadian Federation of Municipalities, which will receive billions of dollars of your tax money and mine. Much of that money, by the way, earned by the oil and gas sector, which provides anywhere from $20 to $40 billion in net revenues to the federal, provincial, municipal governments in this country every damn year.
My friend, this is something I want to talk about. The second that you brought up the Canadian Federation of Municipalities, this is something that I have personally been looking into, as several of my friends across the country have been. Maggie Hope Braun is one who has started a group called KICLI, which is a play on words of the organization ICLI, which is from the United Nations. It's their climate group that branches into different countries. ICLI in Canada is the Partners for Climate Protection, which is hand in hand with the Federation of Canadian Municipalities.
Right.
When you look up ICLI Canada, what comes up is the Partners for Climate Protection. And they brag about having 400 municipalities from coast to coast as a member of their club. Do you know anything about that?
I do know about them. I know of organizations that work within them as well. Here in Ontario, of course, we had what was the name of that group? Rick Gibbons and his group working here, Clean Air Ontario, and a bunch of others that fall into that. And where they go is they say to municipalities, we convinced you 2 years ago, 3 years ago to accept that there's a climate crisis. Well, now that you've done that, guess what? You have to admit that we have to do something about it. Let's get rid of all natural gas backups. In other words, the stuff that provides energy in a moment's notice when our nukes can't live up to it, when other provinces are taking, like Quebec in particular, which takes a lot of our energy here in Ontario at certain times of the year, especially. So now we have municipalities that have been sort of bamboozled. They've been, they've been sort of kicked in the head because they're not sophisticated. I'm not taking away from municipalities. I'm sure they can do great work. But since when do people who are supposed to be looking after the interests of municipalities suddenly want to get into the climate scam? Well, they say, well, it's because of flooding and things like that. Listen, we've had flooding here for generations. It's not a new thing. And we've had warm weather, and we've had cold weather, and we've had bad weather, and we've had poor weather. We've had forest fires. We've had all sorts of things. It's not going to change because you advocate for a tax or that you shut down the ability for people to make ends meet and keep warm in the colder winter.
Well, what about the smart city concept, which seems to be rolling out at breakneck speed all across the country? That's part of what these 400 municipalities have signed up to do, I guess, with the Partners for Climate Protection. I know there's something going on in Winnipeg. They've released a plan called the Winnipeg Metropolitan Region Plan 2050. I know there's a healthy city plan in Brandon. I know Edmonton has got a smart city concept. I know Vancouver has signed up for a 17 village proposition. Calgary, Toronto, Montreal. What's that all about?
Make work projects for folks who can't get a job in the real world. I mean, frankly, it's just, if someone's going to pay you this kind of money to come up with these wild ideas, it's the envy of guys like Joseph Stalin. And I'm sure that, Kim Jong-un in North Korea would be very happy because he doesn't have anything more than 15-minute cities. You can't travel very far out of them when you can, in fact, get energy. Look, these are Debbie Downers who really do not want, our nation to prosper, and they don't want the nation to expand or grow. They want to see things limited. They want to confine your ability to not just make decisions for yourself, but also to choose the things that you need that best suit you and your family. In fact, they don't even want families. This is really the the theater of the absurd. And I think people who engage in this kind of stuff really need to think loud and clear about what's motivating them, because it isn't about the wider public interest. It's just trying to be cool, and something my kids often like to say, because I know they go snaking when they say it, they're trying to be trendy. And unfortunately, it's not going to work. They're as wrong about what's going to happen in 2050 with their net zero as they are, forcing people into electric vehicles by 2035. It ain't happening. And those who are advocating it are going to be shown the door. And that's going to happen very soon.
What are your thoughts on Pierre Poilievre?
I knew him.
I know, is this a difficult question? I'm sorry to interrupt you. Is this a difficult question to answer as a former member of the Liberal Party?
No.
Do you still feel that tug inside of you? Well, I was a Liberal for all these years, but things have changed so dramatically now that it seems as though probably Poilievre is the Liberal of today, right?
Yeah, I mean, I debated him. He was young, up and coming, very good, very polished, very knowledgeable. He can wipe the floor with anybody in a debate, and I think media knows that. So do politicians who know how to go up against him. And on that score, I think Canadians have already decided he's head and shoulders above pretty much anybody that's in the House of Commons today. Not a hard thing to do when you got guys like Justin Trudeau and Jagmeet Singh. I think Pierre Poilievre's biggest challenge will be himself. That is to ensure that he does maintain and to grab the center. Even though he has the name of conservative, a lot of Canadians are now saying, hang on a second, I used to have a problem with that name, but I have an even bigger problem paying my mortgage or trying to buy food for the kids or trying to make ends meet. So Canadians haven't got time for these kind of trendy, stupid political partisan games that are great for, people sitting back and, in their riches and saying, we don't worry about how the rest of society is going to work. Pierre Poilievre has tapped into the genius of Canadians. And whether, there's a lot of us who have been warning this is going to happen, I think he is playing it very masterfully. I think there's a chance for the Conservatives to actually, for a very long period of time, occupy the center of the political spectrum. That is to get support from all the areas of the country, from all demographic groups, because people are hurting and they want someone who can take them away from this terrible woke agenda imposed by the left and advocated in particular by people who've never really had a job in their life and people who've never really done anything more than having been given the job with a silver spoon. I mean, a lot of people can say, well, Pierre Poilievre has been a career politician. They can say the same about me. The difference is that Pierre Poilievre didn't get his name, didn't become leader of the party and potentially the next prime minister of this country because his last name was Poilievre. He worked at it. He's going to have to earn his stripes. And however history judges him, it will be the extent to which he can bring people together, unite them, and work at the center of the political spectrum, because the Liberals have completely abandoned that, along with the NDP. There's no one who's speaking up for ordinary central Canadians. And the idea that Canadians are left wing and they're all about, this woke agenda, that might have been worked in 2015, Sunny Ways, the junk that he borrowed from Sir Wilfrid Laurier, which had nothing to do with the context in which he presented it. 2015 is over. People are getting serious. Their noses are to the grindstone. They're going to hear from somebody who can try to patch this country back up again because it badly needs it.
Let me ask you about the media as you see them now. What's happened to them?
I think the smart ones, the good ones, the investigative reporters, the ones that used to do their work, you had an issue, would have someone devoted to working on that issue. And you didn't necessarily have to agree with what they said, but man, they were really going to work hard. That's all gone. It's been halved. It's been changed. It's been, you've got virtue signalers now, coming right out of, journalism school. It's not like Shadow your time or even my time where you dealt with people who were career journalists. And that's not necessarily the fault of anyone other than the fact that I think we've seen social media rise to the extent that it has obviated the presence of mainstream media. But, when you see things like what CTV did a couple of weeks ago, the hatchet job they tried to do on Pierre Poilievre, this just really feeds into the cynicism of the public. It's one thing to be cynical about politicians, but if a politician pulled that kind of stunt, they'd be outed for it. It works true for the media. And as much as CTV apologized for it, it's still not going to undo the damage. Worse, Canadians who are struggling are saying, hey, there's still a government that's pulling 30, 40, 50, 60% in taxes from my pocket. It's going to subsidize media because they can't do the job on their own. I'm not suggesting that they can. Maybe they can't stand on their own, and many of them obviously have failed and will fail. But we have to get right the idea, the balance that, you sink or swim in this business. And if you can't survive, maybe you shouldn't be in the business anymore.
Where do you see our country, the world going? And Dan, I know there's a lot of people that talk about, the Western countries being captured by an ideology of globalism and ideas from the World Economic Forum regarding the smart cities and whatnot. And there was a great piece that happened during COVID a couple of years ago when they were remotely attending sessions. One of the MPs, I think from Windsor, maybe it was a conservative MP, asked the question about the capture of cabinet by the World Economic Forum because of that video with Klaus Schwab on YouTube. And magically, the Speaker of the House couldn't hear him, and then he never got to repeat that question again. Is there any outside involvement here? Is Justin Trudeau doing this on his own, from his own ideology, or is he getting some push from someplace else? What do you think?
Well, they're not hiding it anymore. Chrystia Freeland is a director on the World Economic Forum. Why she would have to be, I do not know. This is the same group that Mark Carney hails from. You have elites with wonderful ideas who are, more willing to mucky muck with and rub shoulders with world leaders, and the impression they want to give is let's push a particular agenda, which might be important on a global scale, but has very little to do with what we're doing here in Canada. And one of the biggest problems we have is we have a country that's upside down. You've had 12 countries, some of our best allies, come to our nation and say, please, can you give us some natural gas and some oil? We'd rather have it from you than we would from Iran, Venezuela, Russia. Take your pick. And I'm not talking small countries. These are friends and allies of ours. When Olaf Scholz comes to Canada and as chancellor and says, I need some of your natural gas. Or, South Korea does the same thing, Latvia, Poland, Lithuania. And then we turn around and say to them, or in Greece, and we say, there's no business case. What kind of moron would actually say something like that? You have the third largest provable reserves of oil in the world. That's debatable. And the fifth largest natural gas. United States natural gas plays are starting to decline. Let me give you something from my old days at Gas Buddy. Not only have they produced a lot of the wells are kind of old, and they're going to need to tap into something like Canada's ability to make their LNG work to save the rest of Europe, as we're seeing today. But if we have people going around with no mind, no thought, who are captured strictly by the woke green narrative that says, "Oh, Canada bad, we can't live on fossil fuels," while they sit back and drive away in their limousines and are on their jets as they go to the WEF, or they wear their polyester, or they wear their plastic-made glasses, or whatever the case may be. It seems to me that it's almost surreal. It does not. What we're seeing out there being advocated and espoused by the leadership of this country is complete abandonment and disconnection from reality. And I'm not saying that's because they're evil people. I just think they're extraordinarily incompetent, and they've been led by the nose by a handful of fanatics who have no business being in this country. Maybe we should get people like Stephen Guilbeault and other Marxists to continue dangling from CN Tower, or maybe throw up pizzas on top of the roof of the former premier of Alberta.
So when we talk about affordable energy, we're not talking about solar. We're not talking about wind. We're talking about natural gas, obviously, because you've mentioned it several times since we've been having this conversation, and probably nuclear. Am I correct?
That's right. And, nuclear is not something that we can take for granted. I mean, I came from a riding in Pickering where we had the first commercial nuclear reactors. I always like to keep this thing because it's around here. The first hydronuclear plant built in 1965, long before it was trendy. Our grandparents had this idea that, hey, we don't have the hydrology that Quebec does. The water can come down a certain surface and you can collect that and make hydro dams. We don't have the natural gas or oil that they might have in the United States or in out Western Canada, but we have new technology. It's called nuclear, and we should use that. And not only was it important for Ontario, it made Ontario one of the most competitive, most attractive jurisdictions for the past 50 years in which to invest, and they sure as hell did. The auto manufacturing, the steel manufacturing in this province allowed it to move ahead. So yeah, nuclear is always going to be part of that. And as much as the environmentalists of a previous generation said it was bad, the reality is that that can only get us so far. You can build nuclear reactors. It's how you get them from the power from those reactors to the home to where you need it. And that takes a lot of energy, that takes a lot of mining, and that takes a lot of fossil fuels. And so anybody who thinks this is going away, it's going to disappear, is kidding themselves. Our children and their children will be using fossil fuels responsibly, as we're doing here in Canada, which makes our argument about saying there's no business case so stupid, because the rest of the world knows the great things that we're doing on remediation, on things like sequestration, as we saw at the Boundary Dam plant in Saskatchewan. We have a diverse mix of energy in this country, which is the envy of the world, and we have utilized our best to turn an inhospitable place in the world to live into one of the most successful, not just technologically, but we've built on the great things we have as resources. And so, I'm not one of those who believes you won't have new renewables, but when it takes wind to make a turbine, which has to be made with plastics and resins and polymers by fossil fuels, or you have solar panels, which are made in China, produced by coal generation, those are great, wonderful things. But if there's no sun and there's no wind, you're SOL. And you do need reliable, you need base load, you do need the ability to dispatch that energy quickly. And there's only a few ways in which we can do that. So anybody who's trying to say electrification 80% by 2050, apart from the $2.5–3 trillion of which the country hasn't got, and to use a vernacular that my father would use, we haven't got a window to we haven't got a pot to piss it or a window to throw it out of. You don't have $2.5 trillion. So, give your little heads a shake. You've ran up the tab in the country. The country can no longer afford these trendy, trite little ideas on how we're going to be able to make this transition. There's no transition. And as my old friend said, the only transition we ever seen in energy was going from whale oil to actual oil.
Why do we see so many of these ridiculous windmills that are such eyesores? I mean, I was driving down Trans-Canada through Saskatchewan, I'm going to say it was about a year ago, and I could not believe on Canada's premier highway that we are looking at dozens and dozens and dozens of these monstrosities that after 10 years just completely and totally rot and leave their parts sitting there. I mean, they're huge and they're noisy and they kill wildlife. I mean, how much of the actual power grid is connected to these things? Do you have any idea?
Yeah, well, in my province of Ontario, it's no more than 15%. Alberta can be as high as 20% on a windy day, but when you truly need it, they're not there and they freeze, as we saw in Texas a few years ago. People die. Look, I'm not out there to say these things are bad or good. I'm just simply saying, as a society, and that's a problem for some people because they don't want to talk about society. They want to have that control. As a society, we need to have that kind of flexibility in our energy menu to be able to say, is it deliverable when needed? And when not needed, can we give it away? How are they paid? Simple. In my province of Ontario, the dummies here in 2009 brought the Green Energy Act under Dalton McGuinty. And what it did is it gave 80 cents a kilowatt hour for anybody who brought in windmills versus, and you had to pay that, versus the usual, mainstream stuff, which we had from nuclear and other forms, which were more like 10 cents. So we were paying this massive premium. And of course, we have this problem. They have access to the market. And even when we don't need them, you still have to pay them when they produce. When those little whirly birds go around twirling and creating energy, you have to pay them their 40 to 80 cents a kilowatt hour. And when we have a spillage, or we have too much energy, which often happens, we give it to Michigan or we give it to Quebec for pennies, if lucky. We sometimes pay them to take the surplus power off the grid. This is madness. It's insanity. And by the way, I'm in the province of Ontario. We pay $11 billion a year, so consumers don't have to pay 30 cents a kilowatt hour, which is the actual going rate during the week when there is a heavy load from Monday to Friday from 7 a.m. until 7 p.m. That's another thing that never gets mentioned in the media because they don't like to talk about it because they're paid not to talk about it or whatever reason. Maybe it's just fundamental ignorance, but that's okay, Shadow. I have 60,000 people on Twitter. I have 60,000 people Canadians for affordable energy. We can get our point across as you and I are doing right now. We'll go right around them.
How do we find you on social media? Where do we find Canadians for affordable energy, Dan?
Well, president@affordableenergy.ca is my email. Website is affordableenergy.ca, and I've just done a bunch of op-eds here, some in the Western Standard, some in True North. There's no point in trying to go in some of the bigger papers and organizations and beg them to see the obvious. So that's the way in which you can find some of the work that I'm doing. It's very interactive. I do respond to emails. I look from time to time on Twitter. I have a lot of fun on Twitter. I find it's a great place to let my hair down. And of course, given now that it's no longer controlled by a handful of fanatics looking to curb people's views, Gas Price Wizard, or at Gas Price Wizard, is my handle.
Thank you very much. Thank you for joining the show tonight. It's been too long, and I would love to have you back at some point soon. Thank you again.
Let's do it again, Shadow. There's lots to talk about.
All right, brother. Thank you. There's Dan McTeague, the president of Canadians for Affordable Energy. Find him on social media. You can find him on, I guess Western Standard, as he just pointed out, and True North. I'd like to thank Dan for coming on tonight. Speaking of energy, speaking of the carbon tax, speaking of fairness, Danielle Smith had a press conference this morning in Alberta, and here's what she had to say.
October, and here in Alberta, the nights are below zero. There's snow up on the mountains, and parents are preparing to zip jackets over their kids' Halloween costumes. In just a few weeks, winter will be upon us, and Alberta winters are no joke. In this province, winter means long nights and freezing temperatures for weeks at a time. I'm sure we all remember the polar vortex that swept through our province this past January, when daily highs remained around minus 30 degrees and lows were around minus 40 degrees, with the wind chill dropping temperatures closer to minus 50. Those temperatures are devastatingly and dangerously cold. Home heating is not optional, and in Alberta, that means we rely on natural gas not just to keep us warm, but to keep us safe. Winter is coming again, and that means that Alberta families will again feel the sting of the federal carbon tax as they heat their homes with natural gas. Here in Alberta, we don't tend to think that more taxes are the solution for anything, let alone a tax on all the things our citizens need to live and thrive in this cold climate. Given the cost of living challenges many households are facing, piling more financial burden onto Canadians is simply cruel and punitive. Until recently, the punishment from Ottawa was shared equally across the country. At the very least, that equal footing gave Canadians a unified front to push back on the federal government, a sense maybe that we were all in it together. But a year ago, almost to the day, Ottawa announced it was exempting heating oil from the federal carbon tax for 3 years. Now, that's great for the people of Atlantic Canada and Quebec, who have a higher proportion of their citizens who use heating oil. But let's be clear, most Albertans don't resent them for it either. Unfortunately, this exemption applies to practically no one outside of Eastern Canada. Added to that, the carbon tax on natural gas is more than triple the cost of natural gas itself. The carbon tax rate is about 4 cents a gigajoule, and gas is selling for $1.25 a gigajoule. Now, we can debate why Ottawa made this decision. We may even have a few theories, but whatever their reasons, the outcome is blatantly unfair for people in Alberta and other parts of Canada who use natural gas and other fuels to stay warm in the winter. From where we're sitting, it looks an awful lot like one more attempt to divide our country, to reward one region and punish another. And we're not going to sit back and let this unfair carve-out disadvantage Albertans for another winter. And so I'm pleased to announce that this morning, Alberta filed an application for a judicial review of the exemption in the federal court. We're asking the court to declare the exemption both unconstitutional and unlawful. We hope that this will force Ottawa to recognize the burden the carbon tax places on Canadians and eliminate the tax altogether.
When is Justin Trudeau just going to wave a white flag? It's time. It's time. Here's the leader of the Bloc Québécois today in a global piece.
Qua leader Yves-François Blanchet says he will begin talks with other parties to bring down the government after the Liberals failed to meet his party's deadline to support 2 key bills.
We said 5 weeks ago that if we were not received that, if 4 million of Canadians between 65 and 74 years old were not received what we asked, if producer under supply management regime were not to get what we asked, we were to start discussing with opposition parties in order to have this government fall.
Blanchet said the deadline last month, putting the Liberals on notice that they must adopt a pair of bills or face a possible election. The first bill aims to safeguard supply management in trade negotiations. The other raises old age security payments for seniors. Despite the deadline passing, Blanchet says if the Liberals begin negotiations with his party in the days ahead, his party will continue to support the minority government.
If they give you what you ask for, even if it's after this date, does that mean they regain your support?
Let's say that if they give us exactly all we have asked for before they fall, because if there's a vote tomorrow, they might fall tomorrow, we will look into it and we will be coherent with all what we have said so far. We want precisely what is in Bill 3, C319 and in Bill C282. Bring that to us and we'll discuss it. In the meantime, they are seriously in danger to fall.
Well, okay, so there's a lot of variables in play there. First of all, like I said earlier in the show, the government is paralyzed because they won't give the unredacted documents from the $400 million green slush fund to the RCMP. And so the other all of the opposition parties in the House of Commons voted a couple of weeks ago, and it was given the high sign by the Speaker of the House that, all right, if the government does not want to give up these documents, then we can not proceed further with any government business until we get this resolved. That was a point of order that's now almost 3 weeks old by the Conservatives. So if they can somehow manage to remove that piece, then they can get on with government business. And then a confidence vote can come. The Bloc earlier today said they won't be the ones initiating it because they haven't got enough opposition days left. So it would have to be the Conservatives. So what's the scenario there? Let's say the Conservatives, if this whole government paralyzation is over with by next week, decides to introduce a non-confidence vote next week, the Bloc will vote with them. But what about the NDP? And what about those dissident liberal backbench MPs? What are they going to do? I was hoping this was going to be all over with by now, but I don't think so. I believe the earliest we're going to see an election in this country is next year, even with all of the abominable behavior by the Liberals, the foreign interference, the scandals, one after the next. This story comes from TNC.news. Kevin Vong, journalist, and this was yesterday, named 5 officials allegedly involved in foreign influence scheme. Now, we didn't have the responses from the accused MPs or parliamentarians until today. So let's do this story. A group comprising an independent MP, an investigative journalist, and senior bureaucrats named 4 politicians and 1 government advisor allegedly involved in a China-led scheme to interfere in Canadian democracy. Although the Trudeau government continues to withhold the list of elected officials named in a controversial foreign interference report, and that's why Parliament is paralyzed right now, investigative journalist, sorry, that's not why, it's about the slush fund. I'm sorry. Investigative journalist Sam Cooper, there's so many scandals, claims to have uncovered several names of witting or unwitting officials working in favor of China from confidential whistleblowers. 2 of those named by Cooper have denied the allegations. Though Liberal International Trade Minister Mary Ng did not respond to True North's request for comment, she denied the allegations on X. She says, it's unfortunate that Mr. Vong, who's, by the way, a former Liberal MP, now sits as an independent, recently gave Sam Cooper another platform to make insinuations about me, which I categorically reject, she said. Foreign interference is a serious matter of national security, and like all my cabinet colleagues, I've been thoroughly screened by the top security experts in Canada. She took shots at Cooper's credibility, saying his conspiracy theories, here we go again, have been pushed from the main pages of Global News to the only place that will publish them on his own website. It's not okay for him to continue fueling this climate of suspicion against me, Ng said on X. Another individual named by Cooper, a Trudeau-appointed Liberal Senator, Yun Pao Wu, questioned whether Cooper's evidence in the press conference concluded foreign interference on his part at all. He said, "The press conference confirms my longstanding concern about the role of second-rate journalists." So here we go again, insulting the journalists now. "Phony experts, opportunistic politicians, and rogue officials in distracting Canadians from serious foreign interference issues and whipping up a frenzy that feeds on disinformation, partisanship, and bigotry." Oh, that is such a Liberal Party answer, such a woke answer. Cooper also named the Liberal MP for Stevenson Richmond East, Parm Baines, saying he was benefiting from the PRC's alleged foreign interference. Gu Ding, a journalist and advisor to David Eby, the Premier of BC, and former Conservative Senator Victor O is being involved in foreign interference. Neither Baines, Ding, nor O. I'm sorry, that just sounded funny to me. Ding O responded to True North's requests for comment. Unbelievable. Oh, yeah. And then there's a thing about digital ID. Michelle Rempel-Garner, she's the MP, Conservative MP for Calgary-Nose Hill, released this video today.
That's just broken. It's just been posted by Bloc's reporter, and the headline reads, "Feds propose national digital ID." So I'm just going to read the first couple paragraphs of this article so that you can get a sense of what we're dealing with here. Federal regulators yesterday said that they are, quote, "working to establish digital credentials for the public without parliamentary go-ahead. MPs have repeatedly rejected introduction of any national electronic digital ID systems as expensive and risky." And this is a quote from the article. "With more businesses conducted online, the Government of Canada and interested partners need a common set of capabilities to enable people to issue, hold, and present these types of credentials to make trusted claims about themselves in a way that are user-friendly, blah, 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 blah," said a notice to contractors shared by Shared Services Canada, the federal ID department. Any new system, and here's the kicker, any new system should allow regulators to revoke credentials, said the notice on the common set of capabilities for issuing and verifying digital credentials for the Government of Canada. It did not elaborate. The notice did not explain if enrollment would be mandatory. So what's happening here? And again, this is in Bloc's reporter. I'm reading right out of an article. Like this is a journalistic outlet that reports here on the Hill. I'm not making this up. This is right here. It's just breaking. So what's happening here is that in spite of, legislators saying, no, we can't do this. We can't do this. The Government of Canada, the Liberal government, is quietly going around talking about building a digital ID that's, quote, that would, quote, allow regulators to revoke credentials, and did not explain if the enrollment would be mandatory. That's what we're dealing with Justin Trudeau. It's these hidden agendas where he's going out and saying, oh, no, we're not going to do these things. And then through the back door, through these like sneaky little contract things, he's saying what his actual agenda is. You guys are probably asking at this point, well, what are you doing? What's the Conservative Party of Canada doing to stop this? Well, of course we are going to oppose this. Of course we're opposing it. I can give you guys many examples of how we've been fighting back on this. So for example, Liberal Bill C-63, their massive censorship bill, I tabled an opposing bill which would keep Canadians safe online, but, quote, expressly prohibit the use of a digital ID. It's written right into my bill to show that principle in law that we wouldn't do this. And I want to draw your attention to how hard Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre has been working to oppose this issue as well, too. So this goes all the way back to 2022. Here's Pierre Poilievre on his Twitter feed saying, government attempts to impose digital IDs and other intrusive tracking and surveillance message are an attack on our freedom. I will end them. So this is over 2 years ago now. He's had numerous public statements to this effect since then. And then today, in light of reports, this report, again, this is not like, you're not going to find this report on CBC. Of course you're not. Right. Mr. Poilievre has in fact tweeted that he's tweeted about this story. And he says common sense conservatives will ban mandatory digital IDs, full stop. So he's got a link to his petition on his Twitter page. And of course, conservatives are fighting this.
Why not just ban digital IDs altogether? And here's why I say that. Because if you go ahead and ban mandatory digital IDs and leave us a choice, I think that's fine. But what happens when you, as a government, Pierre Poilievre, get defeated 4, 6, 8 years down the road? You know that the Marxists, the globalists, are going to reinstitute that. They're going to just say, all right, so we're bringing this in mandatory now. Just get rid of it altogether and make a new law that says you can never introduce mandatory digital IDs in Canada ever. I'm not sure if you can do that without putting it in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, the Constitution, which would mean you'd have to open the Constitution again. I want to see Pierre Poilievre at least make the attempt to reopen the Constitution. It's so important. There's so many amendments that need to be made. Last night in the Saskatchewan election, good news, the Saskatchewan Party wins. They won the majority of votes there, 232,760 to 173,285 for the NDP. That's not what matters. What matters is the seat count, and the seat count is 35 seats for the Saskatchewan Party, and the Marxists got 26. So once again, we have a common sense majority government in Saskatchewan. And finally tonight, I want to, because, you know, they've been calling Donald Trump a Nazi down there in the United States, the Kamala Harris campaign anyway, and all of her minions and all of the followers on social media. So Donald Trump held a rally. I believe this was in Atlanta. If I'm not mistaken, it was earlier today, or maybe it was last night. He's everywhere. Even though he said he was slowing down, he's everywhere. And this is what he said to that.
Now doing something much worse than what she was talking about. The newest line from Kamala and her campaign is that everyone who isn't voting for her is a Nazi. We're Nazis. You know, years ago, my father, I had a great father, he's a tough guy. He used to always say, never use the word Nazi, never use that word. And he'd say, never use the word Hitler. Don't use that word. It's like, I didn't even know why. Don't use that word. And then I understood it. And yet they use that word freely, both words. They use it, he's Hitler. And then they say, he's a Nazi. I'm not a Nazi. I'm the opposite of a Nazi. I don't know.
This whole thing is so stupid. Trump also mentioned, too, so what are you trying to get me shot again? So there's that. We haven't de-escalated that far in Canada yet, but I would imagine during the next election campaign, something like that is bound to happen. And it's not going to happen from the common sense side, that's for sure. The extension is coming up in just a second on shadowdavis.com. Now, I want to take this opportunity to let all of you, All Access members, know that, yes, we have been having some problems in the back end of the website for whatever reason. So I was up with my website provider until 3:30 a.m. this morning, addressing these problems, trying to fix them. And I did get a little bit of help after 4 hours on the phone. It was like being on the phone with your bank. Oh, can I transfer you to here? Can I transfer you to there? And you got to listen to that terrible hold music between the transfers. And they finally pick up, and they don't really speak English all that well. So it's very difficult to understand. You have to strain to understand what they're saying. And then they'll ask you a technical question you have absolutely no idea how to answer because you're not a tech. But I did spend 4 hours with them last night. We did get some things done, and I'm going to do the same thing again tonight because I just got a message here from one of our site members, Audrey, I think. Audrey, I'm sorry. She says, is there a problem with the website? I'm paid annual subscriber and prompted to resubscribe all day today. I don't know about that one. I fixed other ones last night, and now this new one shows up. So maybe to fix the one thing, they had to screw up the other thing. So I am going to fix that again tonight. I will be on the phone with them again tonight until I get everything straightened away. And the reason for that is because I value you guys. I want you to see the extra I don't want to be sitting here alone for a half hour or an hour with extra content in the extension on the website and nobody watching it. That would suck. It would be lonely and a waste of time. So I am definitely trying to get that fixed. I'm doing as much as I can, and I certainly hope you will give me a couple of days leeway to let me straighten this thing out before you start making your cancellations, because that's no good for me or this show. The more people cancel, the less chance I have of continuing this show moving forward. I would like you guys, if you would, to like and share the show tonight. Great guest, Dan McTeague, who's the president of the Canadians for Affordable Energy. Please get this out there if you're watching on Facebook, if you're watching on YouTube, if you're watching on Twitch or X or Rumble or Telegram. That would be really helpful to the show. And by the way, if you're not following me on YouTube, go ahead and follow me on YouTube. If you're not following on X or on Facebook, please, or Rumble, follow me on all of these different platforms in case one of them decides, well, that's it for him. We're censoring him for good and canceling his page, which could happen. You'll be able to see me on another platform. So please go ahead and do that at your earliest convenience. I love you all. I appreciate you all. I will catch you tomorrow night, 8 o'clock, for another Shadow at Night live stream on social media. The extension begins. Now, here's something very, very interesting. I was sent just about 15 minutes before the show started tonight. It's called The Devil Gives an After-Dinner Speech. I have not seen this yet. Not the whole thing. I watched the first couple of minutes and I thought, ooh, this would be really cool to play in the extension. So we're going to do that. It's about 15 minutes long. Also, about this time last year, we started hearing rumblings that Janet Osbard, the documentarian, was missing and that she was possibly dead. Janet Osbard is the Dutch filmmaker who created the series The Fall of the Cabal. I'm not sure if you guys ever saw that. If not, you should. You can really only get it on BitChute or maybe Rumble at this stage of the game. We're going to play part 1 of that on the extension tonight. So hopefully all of you All Access members can get in, and we'll see you there in 2 minutes' time. Mwah. Have a great night.